Buenas tardes, good afternoon, buonasera. Thank you very much to the eabh for inviting Banco de España to participate in the workshop Good Archives. Grazie alla Fondazione per l'Arte e la Cultura della Compagnia di San Paolo per ospitarci in questi giorni nell'Assemblea annuale della storia bancaria. Our talk this afternoon explains the project in which Banco de España, as the most important Spanish financial institution, have worked in recent years, recovery of Spanish banking archive. Since the foundation in 1782 of the Banco Nacional de San Carlos, predecessor of the Banco de España, this institution has always demonstrated the importance it attached to the preservation of its records, as we can already read in the first act of the Board of Directors held on January 9, 1783, when it was decided to place in the archive the agreements of the General Shareholders Meeting with the rest of the papers that until now have to be conserved. The Historical Archive of the Banco de España opened its door to researchers in 1982 with the opening of its reading room. On the occasion of this fact, and coinciding with the bicentenary of the founding of the Banco Nacional de San Carlos, the first Congress on Economic Archive of Private Banking Institutions was held. This Congress brought together a large group of experts, historians of economic history, and archivists of financial institutions, companies, and public institutions. Professor Anes concluded saying the need for collaboration for the preservation of the archive and the possibility that the archivists and economic historians would establish more regular contact. Records must be stored, catalogued, and made available for the public. 4 years later, in June 1986, the Second Congress on Economic Archive of Private Banking Institutions, Sources for the History of Banking and Commerce in Spain, was held. Its important objective was to awaken in the financial and economic institution the interest in making an effort to maintain and make their archive more accessible. A first conclusion of the Congress was the unanimous request that Banco de España convinced private entities to rescue and order their historical archive and make them more available. Between the celebration of the first and the second Congress, the law on Spanish historical heritage was passed. This law meant a very important step in Spanish legislation regarding the conservation and release of archive and records. Archive and records belonging to banks and saving banks would be included in this law, but without being mentioned specifically. The project. In 2007, 21 years after the Second Congress of Economic History, the idea that Banco de España should promote an initiative to recover the historical archive of financial institutions in line with the conclusion of the Summer Congress of 1986 emerged. The growing concern over the fate of the archive of banks and saving banks and the danger of their dispersion and disappearance inspired the professor of Applied Economics at Universidad Complutense de Madrid, Ángel Luis López Roa, member of the Governing Council of the Banco de España between 2005 and 2017, to promote the initiative again, Recovery of Spanish Banking Archive. Its objective would be to locate the largest possible number of archives of banks and saving banks, including those of the disappearing, merged, or taken over entities, to spread them and to open them to investigation. The first questions that were posed were what to look for, where to look, and how to search. As a starting point, we identified the need to make a banking map that would allow us to know the history and collect the banking transformation, mergers and acquisitions in a chronological and logical way. During the next 2 years, in order to obtain the physical location of the archive, financial institutions were contacted and a questionnaire was sent to them. Due to the differing response and the inaccuracy of the information collected, the Banco de España considered the need to review the progress and result of the work and proposed a change of approach and methodology. The project was lethargic for a few years. In 2013, the project was again promoted with a firm will to achieve the defined objective shown in a guide on all the historical archive that had been preserved. Banco de España hired the professor of History of Economic Institutions, Carmen Angulo, with the purpose to update and revise that first version of the banking map that had been prepared in 2008 and that after the harder years of the crisis and after the reorganization suffered by banks and saving banks had become outdated. The definitive backing for the project was the creation in 2015 of a working group formed by those entities sensitive to the initiative and with an important archival tradition: Banco de Santander, BBVA, Banca March, Banco Sabadell, Banco Popular, taken over by Banco de Santander in 2017, CaixaBank, de Fundación Bancaja, and the Fundación Bancaria La Caixa.
The methodology of the project has been essentially determined by the initial idea of the project, that is to encourage from the Banco de España a proactive movement to support and promote the conservation of the banking archives, which are in constant risk of forgetfulness and loss. To know which archives we wanted to find, we consider two methodological steps. The first one, making a banking map that reflects all the banks that have existed throughout the recent history of Spain. And the second, finding the archives of the banks and saving banks identified in the banking map. The methodology, the banking map is the result of a research work that shows all the banks and saving banks existing in December 31, 2017, and the data of the constitution, denomination changes, acquisition, and mergers throughout the time. In addition, the banking map includes the same type of information about the disappeared banks because of acquisition and mergers. In this way, each disappeared bank is being contextualized in its absorbing bank. The second phase consists of contacting the banking institutions registered in the Banco de España registries of institutions. We ask them about the archives of the banks that were acquired or merged by them according to the banking map in order to find them. We have achieved the participation of 10 banks and banking foundations: Banco de España, Banco de Sabadell, Banco de Santander, BBVA, Fundación Bancaja, Fundación Caja Inmaculada, Fundación Special PINAE, Fundación La Caixa, Fundos, and CaixaBank. 71% of the Spanish bank disappeared by merger or acquisition are now part of these 10 banking institutions. The publication of the guide. The results obtained in the localization phase were very interesting for the researchers, so we decided to publish them. The Guide of Spanish Banking Archives is a unique descriptive instrument of the contents of the Spanish banking archives identified in our project. In the guide are described 182 fonts of historical archives. Banco de España with 3 fonts, Banco de Sabadell 48, Banco de Santander 40, BBVA 56, Fundación Bancaja 8, Fundación Caja Inmaculada 1, Fundación Special PINAE 3, Fundación La Caixa 7, Fundos 15, and CaixaBank 1. The guide has also an introductory study on the evolution of Spanish banking system throughout the 20th century, written by Professor Pedro Tede, that provides the context to fully understand the contents of the guide. The guide ends with a banking map that offers a general overview of the Spanish banking history. The results and conclusion are: first, 700 banking institutions have been identified in the banking map. However, just only 182 archives have been found that represented 26% of the total. Among the 182 found archives, there are several banking institutions with a great relevance in the Spanish financial system, so they have a quality great value. It might seem a short number of archives, but they are much more than had been found 35 years ago, as reflect the minutes of the Congress of Economic Archives of 1982 and 86. The search of archives should be completed in the future with the localization of more banking archives. Awareness of the importance of the documentary heritage has grown in the last 30 years. The project's methodology can be used by other institutions with similar objectives. An important contribution of the guide is to encourage other banks to work on the conservation and dissemination of the historical archives. The guide offers a high valuable information for historical research, and the guide is a true banking archives guide, and it is the first time that this type of compilation work has been published in Spain. To finish, it is essential that all the agents involved in the archives, responsible for banks, institutions, historians, researchers, archivists, and citizens, become aware of the importance of archives to the preservation of historical memory and invest in their preservation and dissemination. Thank you so much.